There was a time when sleep did not begin with comfort, but with exposure. The ground was not something beneath you, but something you belonged to, cold, uneven, and shared with countless other forms of life. No walls held the night back. No fabric separated skin from soil. The body rested where it could, not where it wished. And over time, something subtle may have changed. Not just how humans slept, but what sleep itself meant to the human mind and body. If rest once required constant awareness, what did we lose when sleep became safe? And what was human life really like sleeping on the open ground? Before there were beds, before there were even defined places to rest, the human body met the earth without separation. The ground was not chosen for comfort. It was simply what was there. Soil, stone, packed dirt, scattered leaves. These were not surfaces designed for sleep, but surfaces that existed long before sleep became something humans could shape. In that early condition, the act of lying down did not remove a person from the environment. It placed them more deeply into it. The back pressed against uneven terrain, the side of the face near the scent of soil, the skin exposed to whatever temperature the earth had absorbed during the day or released during the night. Sleep began not as retreat, but as contact. This contact may have defined the earliest form of human rest, where the boundary between body and world remained thin and uncertain. From the beginning of our species, the human body did not arrive in a protected space. It arrived in a landscape that had no reason to accommodate it. There is no clear moment in the archaeological record that shows when people first lay down to sleep on the ground, but there is a broad agreement that early humans, like other primates, would have used available surfaces without permanent modification. Some may have slept on slightly elevated patches of earth, others on areas cleared of debris, but these choices did not transform the ground into something else. They only adjusted it slightly, within narrow limits. The earth remained what it was, hard, variable, and shared. Over time, the body would have had to adapt to this condition, not through conscious intention, but through repeated exposure across generations. Bones carried weight against resistance. Muscles relaxed without support. The spine aligned itself not to a flat surface, but to irregular forms. There is no evidence to suggest that early humans experienced comfort in the way it is understood today. Instead, there may have been a gradual tolerance, a familiarity with pressure and imbalance that did not disappear, but became expected. In this way, sleep was not a separate activity from survival. It was a continuation of it, carried into the night. The temperature of the ground played a quiet but persistent role. During the day, the earth absorbed heat. At night, it released it slowly, creating a shifting gradient beneath the body. In some environments, this may have offered slight warmth. In others, especially in colder climates or seasons, the ground could draw heat away from the body more quickly than the air. Without insulation, this exchange would have been constant. The human body, which depends on maintaining a stable internal temperature, would have had to respond, not by controlling the ground, but by adjusting position, curling inward, reducing exposed surface area. These small physical responses did not eliminate discomfort. They managed it moment by moment. The origins of such behaviors are not recorded directly, but they can be observed in many mammals today, suggesting patterns that may extend deep into evolutionary time. The surface itself was rarely still. Small movements in the soil, the presence of insects, the shifting of loose material under weight, these introduce subtle disturbances. Sleep, in this context, could not rely on stillness. It had to exist within movement, however slight. The body may have learned to accept a certain level of interruption without fully waking. This does not imply a lighter or deeper sleep in a simple sense, but a different structure, shaped by the need to remain partially responsive to the environment. Modern studies of sleep in less industrialized settings suggest that human sleep can vary in pattern and depth depending on environmental conditions. Though these observations do not directly recreate prehistoric life, they offer only a cautious indication that sleep is not fixed, but adaptable within limits. What remains consistent is that the ground, as the first place of rest, did not isolate the sleeper. It connected them to a broader system of temperature, texture, and presence. In that connection, the act of sleeping on the open ground was not just a physical posture. It was a condition of being within the world without barrier, where rest did not remove uncertainty but coexisted with it. The human story begins not with control over the environment, but with endurance within it. And nowhere is that more quietly visible than in the simple act of lying down on the earth at the end of the day. As the body settled onto the ground night after night, a quiet exchange began to shape the experience of sleep. The earth did not simply support the body, it interacted with it, especially through temperature. Long before controlled fire or constructed bedding became reliable, the ground itself acted as a shifting surface of heat and cold. During daylight, soil and stone absorbed energy from the sun. After sunset, that stored warmth dissipated slowly, but not evenly. Some areas retained heat longer, while others cooled quickly, depending on moisture, density, and exposure. When a human body lay down on such a surface, it entered into direct thermal contact with something far less stable than air. Heat moved away from the body through conduction, often more efficiently than through the surrounding atmosphere. This meant that the ground could draw warmth from the body in a way that felt gradual but persistent, especially during the deeper hours of the night. There is no indication that early humans could prevent this process in a consistent way. At most, they could respond to it. One of the simplest responses would have been a change in posture. Curling inward reduces the amount of surface area exposed to cooler surroundings. Many mammals display this position when resting, suggesting an adaptive pattern that conserves heat. It is possible that early humans did the same, not as a learned behavior in the modern sense, but as a repeated physical response reinforced over time. When the ground beneath was colder than the body, the side in contact would lose heat more quickly, encouraging small shifts, rolling slightly, drawing limbs closer, adjusting pressure points. These movements would not eliminate the exchange of heat, but they could redistribute it, preventing any single area from cooling too rapidly. In warmer climates, the relationship could reverse. The ground, heated during the day, might remain warmer than the air for some time after sunset. In such cases, contact with the earth could provide a limited source of warmth, yet even this was temporary. As the night progressed, temperatures would often fall, and the initial comfort could give way to cooling. The body would then face a gradual change in conditions without warning. This variability meant that sleep was not supported by a constant environment. It unfolded within a system that shifted over hours, requiring ongoing adjustment. The absence of insulation played a central role in this experience. Without materials to separate skin from ground, there was little to slow the transfer of heat. Clothing, if present at all in early periods, was not always sufficient to create a stable barrier. The ground remained an active participant in the body's thermal balance. This is important because human sleep depends, in part, on maintaining a relatively stable internal temperature. When the body loses heat too quickly, it may trigger subtle physiological responses, tightening muscles, altering circulation, or shifting sleep depth. These processes are well documented in modern physiology, though applying them directly to early human conditions requires caution. Still, they suggest that the environment beneath the body could influence not only comfort, but the structure of sleep itself. Across the longer span of human evolution, such repeated interactions may have shaped how the body prepared for rest. The timing of sleep, the choice of location, even the orientation of the body relative to wind or terrain, could have influenced how much heat was retained or lost. None of these adjustments would have created certainty. They only increased the likelihood of maintaining a tolerable balance through the night. The ground, in this sense, was not passive. It imposed conditions that had to be met continuously, without pause. In observing present-day environments that remain less modified, researchers have noted that people often choose sleeping surfaces with slight elevation or natural insulation, such as dry grass or leaves. When available, these choices reduce direct contact with colder or damp ground. While such observations cannot be used to reconstruct specific prehistoric behaviors with precision, they do suggest that even minimal separation from the earth could make a meaningful difference. The absence of that separation in earlier periods would have left the body more exposed to the full effect of the ground's temperature. This exposure connects back to the earliest stages of human existence, when the species emerged in environments that offered no built protection. The relationship between body and earth was immediate and unavoidable. Sleep did not occur in isolation from this relationship. It was shaped by it, moment by moment, through the simple but continuous movement of heat between skin and soil. In that exchange, the act of resting on the open ground became not just a posture, but a negotiation with the physical world that extended throughout the night. As the body continued to meet the ground without any layer in between, another quiet influence began to shape the experience of sleep. It was not only temperature that mattered, but pressure. The surface beneath was rarely even. Small stones, compacted soil, roots, and slight changes in elevation created a landscape that pressed back against the body in uneven ways. Unlike a constructed surface, which distributes weight more uniformly, the open ground concentrated pressure at specific points. The shoulder, the hip, the side of the ribcage, and parts of the face could carry more weight depending on how the body was positioned. Over time, this created a pattern of contact that was not stable. It shifted with each movement, each adjustment made in response to discomfort or numbness. The human body, in its structure, is not designed for perfect stillness. Joints allow for flexibility, muscles for small corrections, and the nervous system for detecting changes in pressure. When lying on a hard, irregular surface, these systems remain active, even during rest. Pressure on one area for too long can reduce circulation locally, creating a gradual sense of discomfort that may not fully wake a person, but can lead to repositioning. These subtle movements, repeated across the night, may have formed an important part of how sleep was sustained on the ground. Rather than a long, uninterrupted stillness, sleep may have involved a sequence of partial adjustments, each one redistributing weight across different parts of the body. There is no direct record of how often such movements occurred in early human life, but modern observations of people resting on firm surfaces suggest that the body naturally seeks to relieve pressure points over time. This tendency likely extends deep into human history. The spine, in particular, would have encountered the ground without the support that modern bedding provides. Instead of resting along a flat plane, it would have adapted to whatever shape the terrain offered. This does not mean that early humans experienced harm in a consistent or predictable way, but it does suggest that alignment, as it is often discussed today, was not a controlled factor. The body did not impose its preferred structure onto the ground. It adapted to what was available. Over long periods, this repeated adaptation may have influenced how the body tolerated asymmetry and variation during rest. Muscles may have remained slightly engaged, not fully relaxed, maintaining a degree of readiness even during sleep. This does not imply tension in a conscious sense, but a background state of responsiveness that differed from the complete release often associated with modern comfort. The ground also carried texture beyond hardness. Dry soil might shift slightly under weight, while compacted earth would resist it. Loose material such as leaves or grass, when present, could provide minimal cushioning, though not consistently. In some environments, the surface might include moisture, adding another layer of complexity. Damp ground can feel colder, and may increase the rate at which heat is drawn away from the body, while also softening the surface in ways that change how pressure is distributed. These variations meant that each place of rest carried its own physical character. Sleep was not only about lying down, but about entering into contact with a specific terrain that shaped the body's position throughout the night. Across the broader timeline of human origins, this condition reflects a fundamental aspect of early life. The human body developed in environments where surfaces were not engineered for rest. Instead, rest had to occur within the limits imposed by those surfaces. The ability to tolerate uneven pressure, to shift position without full awareness, and to maintain rest despite physical irregularity may have been part of what allowed sleep to occur at all under such conditions. Observations from other mammals suggest similar patterns. Many species sleep on natural ground without constructed support, relying on frequent adjustments and positions that distribute weight in manageable ways. While human sleep is distinct in many respects, these shared tendencies point toward a broader biological capacity to rest under less controlled circumstances. The absence of a stable, supportive surface did not prevent sleep, but it likely shaped its texture. Sleep became something that moved with the body, adapting to pressure as it changed, rather than settling into a fixed state. In this way, lying on the open ground was not simply an act of rest. It was an ongoing interaction between body and surface, where pressure guided movement and movement allowed rest to continue without interruption. When the body lay down on the open ground, it did not leave the environment behind. Night did not create a boundary. It only changed the form of what surrounded the sleeper. The air cooled, the light faded, and the sounds that had been scattered across the day began to gather into a different pattern. Without walls, without a constructed shelter, the human body remained fully exposed to these changes. Sleep did not occur in a contained space. It unfolded within an open field of shifting conditions, where the environment continued to act on the body even as awareness began to recede. Darkness in this setting was not uniform. On some nights, the moon offered a faint and uneven illumination, casting soft outlines across the ground. On others, clouds or the absence of moonlight created a deeper obscurity, where shapes dissolved and distance became difficult to judge. The human eye, limited in low light, would have adjusted gradually, but not completely. This partial vision meant that the surroundings were never entirely known during the night. The body lay in a space that could not be fully seen, only partially sensed. This uncertainty did not disappear with rest. It remained present, forming a quiet background to the act of sleeping. Sound carried differently in the open. Without barriers to absorb or block it, even small movements in the distance could travel across the ground. The rustle of vegetation, the shifting of animals, the movement of air through uneven terrain. These created a continuous layer of auditory information. For a body at rest, these sounds did not necessarily lead to full awakening, but they could influence the depth and continuity of sleep. The human nervous system is capable of filtering repeated or familiar sounds, allowing rest to continue. At the same time, unexpected or irregular noises may prompt subtle responses, even without conscious awareness. This balance between filtering and responsiveness would have been essential in an open environment, where the distinction between harmless and potentially threatening signals could not always be made in advance. The presence of wind added another dimension to exposure. Air moving across the surface of the skin can alter the perception of temperature, often making the body feel cooler than the surrounding air alone would suggest. Without layers of protection, this effect would have been direct. The body might respond by adjusting position, turning away from the direction of the wind, or drawing limbs closer to reduce exposure. These adjustments, like many others, would not eliminate the influence of the environment, but they could moderate it. Over the course of a night, such small changes could accumulate, shaping the pattern of rest without forming a stable condition. Moisture in the air or on the ground introduced further variability. Dew could settle during the night, gradually dampening the surface beneath the body or the materials, if any, placed between skin and soil. This moisture could increase the transfer of heat away from the body and alter the texture of the ground, making it less stable or more conductive. The body, already engaged in maintaining its internal balance, would have had to respond to these subtle shifts without full awareness. The process was continuous, not defined by a single event, but by a sequence of small interactions that unfolded over time. In considering the origins of human sleep, this open exposure reflects a condition that predates controlled environments. Early humans did not begin with shelter as a given. Instead, they existed within landscapes that offered varying degrees of protection, none of which were permanent or fully enclosing. The act of lying down at night did not remove a person from these landscapes. It placed them within a different phase of them, where visibility decreased, temperatures shifted, and other forms of life became more active. Observations of present-day human groups living in less modified environments suggest that sleep often occurs with an ongoing awareness of surroundings, even if that awareness is reduced. These observations cannot be used to define a single pattern for all early humans, but they indicate that sleep in open conditions is compatible with a form of partial responsiveness. The body does not fully disengage. It remains connected to the environment, capable of detecting changes that may require action. This connection does not prevent rest, but it shapes it. Sleep becomes something that exists alongside exposure, not apart from it. In this way, lying on the open ground at night was not simply a matter of finding a place to rest. It was an acceptance of the environment as it was, with all its variations and uncertainties. The body entered sleep without closing itself off, maintaining a link to the surrounding world that continued quietly until morning. As the night deepened, sound became one of the most persistent elements shaping the experience of sleep in the open. Without barriers to soften or contain it, the environment remained acoustically active. The ground, the air, and the surrounding vegetation carried vibrations across distance, often in ways that were difficult to locate precisely. A small movement could seem closer than it was, while a larger disturbance might be partially absorbed by uneven terrain. For a body lying directly on the earth, these sounds did not arrive only through the ears. Some were transmitted through contact with the ground itself, subtle shifts felt through bone and muscle, adding another layer of sensory input. This meant that sleep did not occur in silence, but within a field of continuous, low-level information that the body could not fully ignore. The human auditory system is capable of adjusting to repeated patterns. Sounds that remain consistent over time can become part of the background, no longer requiring attention. This ability allows sleep to continue, even in the presence of ongoing noise. At the same time, irregular or unfamiliar sounds may trigger a different response. Even without full awakening, the brain can shift into a more alert state, increasing sensitivity to further changes. Modern studies suggest that certain stages of sleep allow for this kind of monitoring, where external stimuli are processed at a reduced level but not entirely excluded. While these findings come from controlled environments, they offer a cautious insight into how sleep might function in more exposed conditions. The body does not fully disconnect from sound. It maintains a selective awareness, balancing rest with the possibility of response. In an open landscape, this balance would have been constantly tested. The variety of sounds could include the movement of animals, the friction of branches, the flow of air through different surfaces, and the occasional sudden noise that breaks the existing pattern. Each of these carries different implications, but the body at rest does not categorize them with clarity. Instead, it responds to changes in intensity, rhythm, and proximity. A steady, predictable sound may fade into the background, while a sudden interruption may prompt a brief shift in breathing, muscle tone, or sleep depth. These reactions do not always lead to full awareness, but they represent a form of ongoing engagement with the environment. Over the course of the night, this engagement may have created a sleep pattern that included more frequent, subtle transitions between deeper and lighter states. Not as a disruption in the sense of failure, but as an adaptation to conditions where complete isolation from sensory input was not possible. The body rested, but it did so with a degree of openness, maintaining the capacity to detect what could not be seen in the dark. This openness does not imply constant vigilance in a conscious sense. Rather, it reflects a system that remains partially receptive, even during rest. Across the long span of human development, such a system may have been essential in environments where potential changes could occur at any time during the night. Observations of other mammals support this possibility. Many species exhibit sleep patterns that allow for rapid shifts in awareness, often without fully waking. While human sleep is more complex, these shared traits suggest a broader biological tendency toward flexibility in response to environmental conditions. The absence of enclosed spaces in early human life would have made such flexibility more relevant. There was no consistent way to block or control sound. Instead, the body adapted to its presence. This adaptation does not require precise knowledge of specific threats or events. It operates at a more general level, responding to variation and unpredictability. In this context, the sounds of the night were not simply background elements. They were part of the structure within which sleep occurred. The body lay on the ground, not separated from these sounds, but immersed in them. Over time, this immersion may have shaped how sleep was experienced, not as a complete withdrawal from the world, but as a state that remained connected to it in subtle and continuous ways. Beyond sound and darkness, the night environment continued to shift in quieter, less visible ways. Air moved across the landscape in patterns that were rarely constant. Wind could rise and fall without clear rhythm, sometimes passing gently over the body, at other times carrying a sharper edge that altered how the skin perceived temperature. Even a slight movement of air can increase the rate at which heat leaves the body, especially when there is no barrier to slow it. This effect, often unnoticed during waking hours, becomes more pronounced during rest, when the body is less active and generates less internal heat. Lying on the open ground, the body would have remained fully exposed to these changes, unable to control them, only able to respond in small physical ways. A shift in position, a turning of the back toward the wind, or a gradual curling of the limbs could reduce exposure, but never fully remove it. The interaction between air and ground created a layered environment where conditions near the surface could differ from those slightly above it. Cooler air tends to settle closer to the ground during the night, especially in open or low-lying areas. This means that the body, in direct contact with the earth, may have been surrounded by air that was colder than the air at standing height. The difference might not have been extreme, but it would have been consistent enough to influence how the body experienced the night. Without elevation or insulation, the sleeper remained within this cooler layer, where both the ground beneath and the air around contributed to the gradual loss of warmth. Moisture added another dimension to this process. As temperatures dropped, water vapor in the air could condense into dew, forming a thin layer of moisture on surfaces exposed to the open sky. This included the ground, any natural materials used for minimal covering, and the outer surface of the body itself. Moisture on the skin can increase heat loss, as evaporation draws energy away from the body. It can also change how the ground feels, making it softer in some places, more compact in others, and often cooler to the touch. These changes did not occur all at once, but developed slowly over the course of the night, often without clear boundaries between one state and another. The body, already engaged in maintaining its internal balance, would have responded through subtle adjustments that did not require full awareness. The combination of wind and moisture could create a condition where the environment remained in quiet motion. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would necessarily wake a person completely, but enough to prevent the night from becoming still. Sleep, in this setting, did not unfold in a stable frame. It existed within a series of small changes, each one influencing how the body rested. The absence of shelter meant that these changes were not filtered or delayed. They reached the body directly, shaping the experience of sleep in ways that were continuous rather than occasional. Looking back toward the earlier stages of human life, this exposure reflects a fundamental condition. The human body developed in environments where control over microclimate was minimal or absent. There were no enclosed spaces to hold warmth, no structures to block the movement of air, no materials consistently available to create separation from damp surfaces. Instead, the body existed within the same system that governed the surrounding landscape. The timing of rest, the choice of location, and the orientation of the body would all have influenced how these environmental factors were experienced. But none of these could fully remove the underlying exposure. Observations of present-day natural environments show that even small differences in terrain, such as slight elevation, proximity to vegetation, or the presence of natural barriers, can affect wind patterns and moisture levels. It is possible that early humans, like many animals, selected resting places that offered some degree of moderation. However, these choices would have been limited by what the environment provided. There is no evidence to suggest that early sleeping sites consistently achieved stable conditions. Instead, variability remained a defining feature. In this context, sleeping on the open ground was not simply a matter of lying down in an unprotected space. It involved entering into a dynamic system where air, moisture, and temperature interacted continuously. The body did not withdraw from this system during sleep. It remained within it, adjusting quietly as conditions changed. Rest, therefore, was not separate from exposure, but shaped by it, moment by moment, through influences that were often subtle, yet persistent across the entire night. When the human body lay on the open ground, its response was not only shaped by the environment outside, but by a set of internal processes that continued quietly beneath awareness. Sleep is not a passive state. It is a coordinated biological condition in which multiple systems, temperature regulation, circulation, muscle tone, and neural activity shift in structured ways. These processes evolved under conditions where the body was not insulated from the ground, not protected from the night air, and not separated from the variability of the natural world. To understand what it meant to sleep on the open ground, it becomes necessary to consider how the body itself functioned under those conditions. One of the most fundamental aspects is the regulation of internal temperature. The human body operates within a relatively narrow thermal range, and sleep depends in part on maintaining that stability. During the transition into sleep, body temperature tends to decrease slightly, a process supported by changes in blood flow near the skin. This allows heat to dissipate more easily. On the open ground, however, this natural cooling process would have interacted with the external environment in a more direct way. The ground beneath could draw heat away, while the air above could either slow or accelerate that loss depending on its movement and humidity. The body, in response, would have had to balance its internal cooling with the external conditions, adjusting without conscious control. This balance is not precise. It involves small physiological shifts, constriction or dilation of blood vessels, minor changes in muscle activity, and alterations in metabolic rate. These responses help maintain internal stability, but they do not eliminate the influence of the environment. When heat is lost too quickly, the body may respond by increasing muscle tone slightly, generating warmth through subtle contractions. These are not the visible movements associated with waking, but low-level adjustments that occur during rest. Such responses can influence the depth of sleep, creating periods where the body is more active internally, even as it remains outwardly still. Circulation also plays a role in how the body experiences contact with the ground. Blood flow to areas under pressure may be reduced over time, prompting the need for repositioning. This is not a conscious decision, but a reflexive response mediated by the nervous system. Signals from pressure receptors in the skin and deeper tissues can lead to small shifts in posture, redistributing weight and restoring circulation. These movements, often brief and incomplete, allow the body to continue resting without prolonged discomfort. In a setting where the surface is uneven and unyielding, such adjustments would have been frequent, forming part of the natural rhythm of sleep. The nervous system itself remains active throughout the night. Even in deeper stages of sleep, it continues to process sensory input at a reduced level. This includes information from the skin, the inner ear, and other sensory pathways that detect position, movement, and external stimuli. On the open ground, where contact with the environment is constant, this flow of information would not cease. It would be moderated, filtered, and integrated into the ongoing state of rest. This does not mean that the body remained alert in the way it does during waking hours. Rather, it maintained a background level of responsiveness, sufficient to detect significant changes without interrupting sleep entirely. Muscle tone during sleep is another factor shaped by these conditions. In deeper stages, many muscles relax significantly, reducing voluntary movement. However, complete relaxation is not uniform across all muscle groups, and some degree of tone remains to support posture and basic functions. On an uneven surface, this residual tone may have been more engaged, helping the body maintain a stable position despite irregular support. The body did not sink into a surface that conformed to it. It rested on something that required continuous micro-adjustment. Across the long arc of human evolution, these biological responses developed in environments where the ground was the primary place of rest. The systems that regulate temperature, circulation, and movement did not evolve in isolation from that reality. They emerged within it, shaped by repeated exposure to conditions that were variable and often unpredictable. Modern environments, with controlled temperatures and supportive surfaces, reduce the need for many of these adjustments. But the underlying mechanisms remain, reflecting an earlier context in which sleep was not separated from the physical world. In this sense, sleeping on the open ground was not simply a matter of where the body lay. It was a condition that engaged multiple systems at once, requiring continuous internal regulation to sustain rest. The body did not withdraw from its surroundings. It adapted to them, moment by moment, through processes that remain largely invisible, yet essential to the possibility of sleep itself. As the body adjusted to the demands of sleeping on the open ground, posture became one of the most immediate ways to manage both pressure and heat. There was no fixed position designed for comfort. Instead, the body moved toward configurations that balanced stability, warmth, and reduced exposure. Among these, a curled posture stands out as a simple and widespread response across many species. Drawing the knees toward the chest, lowering the head, and bringing the limbs closer to the center reduces the surface area exposed to cooler air and limits the parts of the body in direct contact with the ground. This position does not eliminate heat loss, but it slows it, allowing the body to retain warmth more effectively over time. It also creates a more compact shape, which can be easier to stabilize on uneven terrain. The side-lying position may have been common for similar reasons. Lying on one side distributes weight across a narrower set of contact points while allowing the body to maintain a degree of balance. The spine, in this position, follows a natural curve, though it is not supported in a uniform way. The shoulder and hip absorb much of the pressure, prompting periodic adjustments. These shifts, often subtle, help prevent prolonged compression in any one area. The body may roll slightly forward or backward, or alternate sides over the course of the night. Each movement redistributes both pressure and heat, maintaining a tolerable equilibrium rather than achieving complete comfort. In contrast, lying flat on the back exposes a larger portion of the body to the air and increases the area in contact with the ground. In an open environment, this could lead to faster heat loss, especially if the ground is cooler than the body. While this position allows for a more even distribution of weight, it may not have been sustained for long periods under such conditions. The body, responding to cooling or discomfort, would likely shift toward positions that offered greater conservation of heat. The stomach-lying position presents another variation, where the front of the body meets the ground. This may reduce exposure to air but can place pressure on the chest and restrict breathing to some extent, depending on the terrain. Without a consistent surface, maintaining this position for extended periods may have required ongoing adjustment. None of these positions existed in isolation. The body likely moved through them over the course of a single night, guided by internal signals related to temperature, pressure, and circulation. These transitions did not require full awareness. They occurred as part of the body's automatic regulation, allowing sleep to continue while conditions changed. The absence of a fixed supportive surface meant that posture was not chosen once and held. It was revised repeatedly, forming a sequence rather than a single state. The way limbs were positioned also played a role. Arms might be drawn inward to conserve heat or placed beneath the head to create a minimal form of elevation. Hands could rest against the body or the ground, sometimes shifting in response to pressure. Legs might be bent or extended depending on the need to reduce contact with colder surfaces or to relieve tension in the muscles. These variations reflect a body that remains active at a low level, continuously seeking balance between competing demands. From a broader perspective, these patterns of posture connect to the early conditions in which the human body evolved. The ability to rest without a constructed surface required flexibility in positioning, tolerance for uneven support, and responsiveness to changing environmental factors. These traits are not unique to humans, but they are present in a form that supports extended periods of rest despite variability. Observations of people in environments with limited access to modern bedding show that a range of postures can support sleep, often shifting over time rather than remaining fixed. While such observations do not define prehistoric behavior, they suggest that the human body is capable of adapting its resting position within certain limits. The ground, in this context, does not dictate a single posture. It creates conditions that favor some positions over others, depending on temperature, texture, and exposure. The body responds by adjusting its shape, reducing heat loss where possible, and redistributing pressure to maintain circulation. These adjustments are not precise solutions. They are ongoing responses to a surface that does not conform. In this way, posture becomes part of the process through which sleep is maintained, not a separate choice made in advance. Lying on the open ground, the body does not settle into a final position. It continues to adapt, quietly, throughout the night. As the body continued to rest on the open ground, the structure of sleep itself may have differed in ways that are not immediately visible, but can be approached through what is known about human biology. Sleep is not a single, uniform state. It moves through cycles, shifting between lighter and deeper phases, each with its own patterns of brain activity and bodily response. In a controlled environment, these cycles tend to follow a relatively stable rhythm. On the open ground, where exposure to sound, temperature, and physical contact remains constant, this rhythm may have taken on a different shape. The body, still engaged with the surrounding world, would have had to balance the need for restorative depth with the need to remain responsive to change. This balance does not suggest that sleep was incomplete, but that it may have included more frequent transitions between states. In lighter phases of sleep, the body remains more sensitive to external stimuli. Sounds, shifts in temperature, or changes in pressure can be registered without fully waking the individual. These moments allow for small adjustments, turning slightly, repositioning a limb, altering breathing patterns before returning to a deeper state. On the open ground, such transitions may have occurred more often, not as interruptions in the sense of failure, but as part of a pattern shaped by continuous exposure. The absence of a stable, insulated environment meant that the body could not fully disengage from external conditions. Instead, it maintained a rhythm that allowed for periodic responsiveness within the broader structure of rest. Deeper phases of sleep, which are associated with physical restoration, may still have occurred, but perhaps in shorter or more variable intervals. The body does not abandon its need for these phases, as they are essential for recovery and function. However, the timing and duration of these deeper states can be influenced by environmental factors. If the ground becomes colder, if moisture increases, or if sounds become more irregular, the body may shift out of deeper sleep more readily. This does not eliminate the restorative process, but it distributes it differently across the night. Rather than long, uninterrupted periods of depth, there may have been a pattern of entry and exit, shaped by conditions that could not be controlled. The concept of complete stillness during sleep may not fully apply in this context. Even in modern settings, the body moves during the night, though often without awareness. On the open ground, these movements may have been more closely tied to external factors. A change in wind direction, a cooling surface, or a new source of sound could prompt a brief adjustment, followed by a return to rest. These micro-awakenings, if they occurred, would not necessarily rise to the level of conscious experience. They would remain within the lower layers of awareness, allowing the body to continue sleeping while still responding to its surroundings. Across the longer span of human origins, this pattern suggests that sleep was not defined by complete separation from the environment. Instead, it existed as a state that remained connected, allowing the body to rest while still participating in the conditions around it. Observations of sleep in various human populations today show that there is no single universal pattern. Sleep can be segmented, variable in timing, and influenced by social and environmental factors. While these observations cannot be used to directly reconstruct prehistoric life, they indicate that human sleep is adaptable within certain limits. The open ground, as a sleeping surface, would have been one of the factors shaping that adaptability. The nervous system in particular plays a central role in managing this balance. It regulates transitions between sleep stages, integrates sensory input, and coordinates bodily responses without requiring conscious control. In an environment where external stimuli are ongoing, this system would have remained active, filtering information and determining when to allow deeper rest and when to shift toward a lighter state. This process does not require awareness of specific events. It operates through patterns of change, detecting differences rather than identifying causes. In this way, the body could maintain a form of sleep that was both restorative and responsive, even without the protections that later environments would provide. The open ground did not offer a stable frame for sleep. It introduced variability at every level: physical, thermal, and sensory. The body, rather than resisting this variability, adjusted to it through the structure of sleep itself. Rest became something that moved between states, shaped by the conditions of the night, and sustained through a continuous exchange between the internal systems of the body and the external world in which it lay. Long before artificial light altered the night, the transition from day to darkness followed a gradual and predictable rhythm. The fading of sunlight did not occur all at once. It moved slowly across the landscape, shifting colors, softening edges, and reducing contrast until the environment became more difficult to perceive. For a human body preparing to rest on the open ground, this transition was not only visual, it signaled a change within the body itself. The human biological clock, shaped over long periods of evolution, responds to light as one of its primary cues. As brightness decreases, internal processes begin to adjust, preparing the body for sleep. This adjustment includes changes in alertness, body temperature, and the release of certain hormones associated with the onset of rest. In an environment without artificial illumination, these signals would have remained closely aligned with the natural cycle of the sun. Darkness, however, was not a single condition. Its character varied depending on the presence of the moon, the clarity of the sky, and the surrounding landscape. On nights with a visible moon, the ground could be partially illuminated, allowing shapes and movements to be perceived at a reduced level. This light was not strong, but it created a form of visual continuity, where the environment did not disappear completely. On nights without moonlight, or when clouds obscured it, the darkness could become more complete. In such conditions, the limits of vision became more pronounced. The body lay within a space that could not be clearly seen, relying more heavily on other senses to interpret the surroundings. This variation in light would have influenced not only how the environment was perceived, but how the body transitioned into sleep. The presence of light, even at low levels, can affect the timing and depth of sleep. Modern studies indicate that exposure to light during the night can delay or alter the body's internal rhythms. While these studies are conducted in controlled settings, they suggest that natural variations in nighttime light may have played a role in shaping sleep patterns. The absence of artificial light meant that these variations were not overridden. The body remained responsive to subtle changes in brightness, adjusting its internal state accordingly. The horizon itself may have served as a reference point during this transition. As the sun set, the gradual loss of light from one direction could have influenced how the body oriented itself in the environment. The fading of the sky, the cooling of the air, and the lengthening of shadows all formed part of a continuous process that led into night. There was no clear boundary marking the beginning of sleep. Instead, the body moved through a sequence of changes that aligned with the external world. In the context of early human life, this alignment reflects a condition where internal rhythms were closely tied to environmental cycles. There was little separation between the two. The timing of rest, the duration of sleep, and the transitions between different states were all influenced by the natural pattern of light and darkness. Observations of present-day human groups living without consistent access to artificial lighting suggest that sleep often follows a pattern that begins sometime after sunset and may include periods of wakefulness during the night. These patterns vary and should not be taken as exact representations of earlier periods, but they indicate that human sleep is flexible within the constraints of environmental cues. The open ground, as a place of rest, did not shield the body from these cues. It placed the sleeper directly within them. Light from the sky reached the eyes without obstruction. The gradual changes in brightness were experienced fully, without delay. This direct exposure meant that the body's internal processes remained synchronized with the external cycle in a way that is less common in modern environments. The absence of artificial light did not simplify the night. It allowed natural variation to remain present, influencing the structure of sleep in subtle but continuous ways. In this setting, lying on the open ground was not only a physical condition, it was also a temporal one, where the body's experience of time was shaped by the movement of light across the sky. Sleep began not at a fixed hour, but within a changing field of brightness and darkness, where the boundary between day and night remained gradual, and the body adjusted itself accordingly. When the last traces of light faded and the environment moved into deeper darkness, vision no longer served as a reliable guide to the surrounding world. The human eye, though capable of adjusting to low light, has clear limits. After a period of adaptation, it can detect broad shapes and movement, but not fine detail. Colors diminish, edges soften, and distance becomes uncertain. On the open ground, where there were no constructed boundaries to define space, this limitation changed how the body related to its surroundings. The world did not disappear, but it became less defined, more continuous, and more difficult to interpret. The horizon, once visible, blended into the sky. Objects that had clear outlines during the day merged into the background. In this condition, the act of lying down did not take place within a clearly bounded space. It occurred within a field of partial perception, where the exact position of nearby features could not always be confirmed. This shift in perception did not necessarily prevent sleep, but it altered the context in which sleep occurred. Without clear visual information, the body relied more heavily on other senses, hearing, touch, and subtle changes in air movement. The ground beneath provided a constant point of reference, but everything beyond immediate contact became less certain. This uncertainty did not imply danger in every moment, but it introduced a condition where the environment could not be fully monitored through sight. The human nervous system, in response, may have maintained a level of readiness that did not require continuous visual input. Instead, it processed changes through patterns, variations in sound, shifts in temperature, or movement felt through contact with the ground. These signals, though indirect, allowed the body to remain connected to its surroundings even when vision was limited. The absence of visual clarity also affected the sense of distance. In darkness, Sounds can seem closer or farther than they are, and movement can be difficult to locate precisely. This ambiguity may have influenced how the body interpreted sensory input during sleep. A sound without a visible source cannot be easily categorized. It remains undefined, prompting a general rather than specific response. The body might shift slightly, alter breathing, or adjust posture, not because it identifies a particular cause, but because it detects a change that falls outside the existing pattern. These responses do not require full awareness. They occur at a level where the boundary between sleep and waking remains blurred. Over the course of the night, such interactions could shape the structure of rest, creating a pattern that includes moments of lighter sensitivity within a broader state of sleep. In considering the origins of human experience, this condition of limited vision reflects a broader reality. Early humans did not possess the ability to illuminate their surroundings at will. The night imposed its own limits, and these limits had to be accepted. The body could not extend its perception beyond what natural light allowed. Instead, it adapted to a form of awareness that did not depend entirely on sight. Observations of other mammals suggest that many species rely on a combination of senses to navigate low-light environments, often maintaining responsiveness even during rest. While human sleep is distinct, these shared tendencies point toward a capacity to function under conditions where vision is incomplete. The open ground, without shelter or artificial light, placed the sleeper directly within this condition. There was no separation from the darkness, no barrier to reduce its effect. The body lay within it, adjusting to its constraints. The inability to see clearly did not stop sleep from occurring, but it shaped how the body remained connected to the environment. Sleep became a state that coexisted with uncertainty, where the absence of visual detail did not eliminate awareness, but redirected it through other channels. In this way, darkness was not simply the absence of light. It was an active condition that influenced how the body rested, how it sensed the world, and how it maintained a connection to its surroundings even as consciousness receded. At certain times during the night, darkness was not complete. The presence of the moon introduced a softer form of light, one that did not restore full visibility, but changed the character of the environment. Moonlight does not illuminate evenly. It creates gradients, areas of faint brightness alongside deeper shadow, shaping the ground into a pattern that is neither fully seen nor entirely hidden. For a body resting on the open ground, this subtle illumination could alter how space was perceived. Edges became slightly more defined, movement more detectable, and the boundary between near and far a little less uncertain. Yet this clarity was partial and often shifting, depending on the position of the moon, the presence of clouds, and the surrounding terrain. The result was not stability, but variation within the night itself. This variation extended across longer cycles as well. The moon follows a pattern that changes over many nights, moving from near darkness to fuller illumination and back again. These changes are gradual, but they affect the amount of light present after sunset and before dawn. In an environment without artificial lighting, such cycles may have influenced how the body experienced the night. On nights with more available light, the transition into deeper sleep might have occurred differently than on nights when darkness was more complete. Modern research indicates that light, even at low levels, can affect the timing of internal biological rhythms. While these findings come from controlled settings, they suggest that natural fluctuations in moonlight could have had subtle effects on sleep timing and depth. The open ground did not filter these changes. It allowed them to reach the body directly, without obstruction. The relationship between light and the human body is not limited to vision. Light entering the eyes influences internal processes that regulate sleep and wakefulness. In the absence of artificial sources, the moon and the stars provided the only nighttime illumination. Their intensity was far lower than that of daylight, but their presence still contributed to the overall light environment. The body, sensitive to these variations, may have adjusted its internal signals in response. This does not imply a precise or uniform effect. The influence of moonlight would have varied with location, weather, and individual conditions. Still, it represents a natural source of variation that was consistently present across human history. The ground, as a place of rest, placed the body in direct relation to these cycles. There was no barrier to block the view of the sky, no enclosure to reduce the incoming light. The sleeper remained within a space where the sky itself formed part of the environment. This connection extended beyond immediate perception. The gradual movement of the moon across the sky, the shifting of light over the course of the night, and the longer cycles of brightness and darkness all formed a temporal structure within which sleep occurred. The body did not need to track these changes consciously. It responded to them through internal processes that aligned, in part, with external cues. Across the broader timeline of human origins, this alignment suggests that sleep was not governed solely by internal rhythms. It was shaped through an interaction between the body and the environment, where light played a central role. Observations of human sleep in natural settings show that exposure to varying light conditions can lead to differences in sleep timing and duration. These observations should be interpreted with care, but they indicate that human sleep remains sensitive to environmental light, even in the absence of modern influences. The open ground as a consistent setting for early rest would have maintained this sensitivity. It did not isolate the body from the sky. It placed the body beneath it, where changes in light could be experienced directly. In this context, sleeping on the open ground was not only an interaction with the surface beneath, but also with the space above. The sky, through its changing light, became part of the structure of sleep. The body lay between ground and sky, receiving signals from both, adjusting quietly as conditions shifted. Rest, therefore, unfolded within a layered environment, where light, though faint, continued to influence the rhythm and depth of sleep across the night and over longer cycles of time. Sleep leaves very little behind. Unlike tools, bones, or traces of fire, the act of resting does not create a clear imprint in the material record. When a human body lies down on the open ground and then rises again, the surface may shift slightly, but these changes are rarely preserved. Wind, water, animal movement, and the passage of time tend to erase such marks quickly. This creates a quiet absence in the archaeological record. There are places where people lived, places where they processed food, and places where they left objects behind. But the specific locations where they slept are often difficult to identify with certainty. This does not mean that sleep was unimportant. It means that it existed in a form that does not easily endure. The ground itself, as the earliest sleeping surface, offers few stable indicators. A patch of soil pressed down by repeated use may not remain distinguishable after even a short period. Organic materials that might have been placed between the body and the ground, such as leaves, grass, or branches, decompose quickly. Even if such materials were used, they would rarely survive long enough to be preserved. In some rare cases, impressions or layering of plant material have been found in ancient sites, suggesting areas that may have been used for resting. These findings, however, are limited and often require careful interpretation. They do not provide a complete picture. They offer only brief glimpses into practices that were likely widespread but left few durable traces. This absence requires a different approach to understanding how humans slept on the open ground. Rather than relying on direct evidence, researchers often look at indirect indicators, the arrangement of living spaces, the distribution of artifacts, and the presence of features such as hearths can suggest areas where people may have gathered and, by extension, where they may have rested. These inferences remain cautious. A place used during the day does not necessarily serve the same function at night. The boundaries between activity and rest may have been fluid, especially in environments without permanent structures. The open ground does not divide space into clear categories. It allows for multiple uses over time, making it difficult to assign a single purpose to any given location. Ethnographic observations provide another form of insight. By studying human groups that live in environments with limited modification, researchers can observe how sleep is organized in relation to space. These observations show a range of practices, from sleeping near sources of warmth to selecting slightly elevated or cleared areas. While such patterns cannot be directly projected onto early human life, they offer possible analogies. They suggest that even without permanent structures, people may have made small adjustments to their surroundings to create more suitable places for rest. Still, these adjustments remain minimal compared to later developments. The ground continues to play a central role, shaping the experience of sleep through its physical and environmental properties. Across the longer span of human history, this lack of direct evidence highlights a broader limitation. Much of what defines daily life does not leave clear traces. Activities that are repeated frequently, such as sleeping, may be among the least visible in the archaeological record. This invisibility does not reduce their importance. It reflects the nature of the materials and processes involved. Sleep, especially on the open ground, does not produce durable artifacts. It exists as a pattern of behavior rather than a physical object. To approach it, one must consider the conditions under which it occurred, rather than expecting to find it preserved in a direct form. The open ground, as a place of rest, reinforces this challenge. It does not record the presence of the body in a lasting way. It returns to its previous state with little evidence of what occurred. In this sense, the earliest human sleep remains largely silent in the material record. What can be known must be assembled from fragments, environmental context, biological understanding, and careful comparison rather than from clear and complete traces. The absence itself becomes part of the story, indicating that the most regular and necessary aspects of human life often leave the least visible marks behind. In the absence of direct traces, the search for where people may have slept on the open ground often turns to patterns that remain in the surrounding context. These patterns are not clear markers of sleep, but they can suggest how space was organized and how different activities may have been arranged in relation to one another. When archaeologists examine a site, they look at the distribution of materials across the surface. Tools, fragments of food, traces of fire, and the positioning of these elements can indicate areas of repeated use. Within these patterns, there are sometimes zones that appear less disturbed or more consistently open. Such areas may not contain the same density of objects, and in some cases they are located near features that provide warmth or relative protection, such as a hearth or a natural barrier. These quieter spaces have been interpreted, with caution, as possible locations where people rested. The reasoning is indirect. If certain activities cluster in one area and others are absent in another, it is possible that the less active space served a different function. This does not confirm that sleep occurred there, but it offers a plausible interpretation based on the organization of the site. The presence of fire features plays a particularly important role in these interpretations. Fire provides light, warmth, and a degree of protection from animals. In sites where hearths are present, there is often a pattern of activity surrounding them. Tools and food remains may be concentrated within a certain distance, suggesting that people gathered around the fire during waking hours. Beyond this central zone, the density of artifacts may decrease. Some researchers have proposed that these peripheral areas could have been used for rest, where the benefits of the fire, its warmth and light were still accessible, but where there was less interference from ongoing activity. This arrangement would allow individuals to remain near the group while occupying a space that was relatively undisturbed. Again, this interpretation remains tentative. It relies on patterns rather than direct evidence, and alternative explanations are always possible. Another form of indirect evidence comes from the study of ground surfaces themselves. In rare cases, layers of compacted plant material have been identified, suggesting that vegetation may have been placed intentionally in certain areas. These layers can indicate repeated use as the material becomes compressed over time. When such features are found in association with other signs of habitation, they may be interpreted as prepared surfaces for resting. However, preservation of this kind is uncommon. Organic materials break down quickly, and only under specific conditions do they survive long enough to be studied. Even when they are present, it is not always possible to determine whether they were used for sleeping, sitting, or other activities. The interpretation depends on context, and certainty remains limited. Ethnographic observations offer another way to approach these questions. By studying how people in less modified environments organize their living space, researchers can identify patterns that might leave similar traces. In some cases, individuals choose slightly elevated ground, areas with natural drainage, or locations near but not directly within the main area of activity. These choices can reduce exposure to moisture, improve airflow, or provide a clearer view of the surroundings. While these practices cannot be assumed for all early humans, they suggest that even without constructed shelters, people may have selected resting places with certain practical considerations in mind. These selections, however, would still leave only minimal traces, especially over long periods of time. Across the broader scope of human origins, these indirect indicators highlight the difficulty of reconstructing something as regular and essential as sleep. The open ground does not preserve intention. It does not record how a space was experienced or how it was used during different times of the day or night. What remains are fragments, patterns of distribution, subtle changes in the surface, and associations between different elements. From these fragments, a picture can be suggested, but not confirmed. This uncertainty is not a limitation of a single site or method. It reflects the nature of the activity itself. Sleeping on the open ground involves contact, presence, and time, but it does not produce durable objects. It leaves behind a pattern that is easily erased. To understand it, one must look not for direct evidence, but for the spaces between other forms of evidence, where activity is reduced and the possibility of rest becomes more likely. In this way, the search for ancient sleep becomes an exercise in reading absence as carefully as presence, recognizing that what is not found may still carry meaning within the broader structure of human life. Even when patterns can be observed and careful interpretations are made, there remains a clear boundary to what can be known about how humans slept on the open ground. Archaeology, by its nature, works with what endures. It relies on materials that resist decay, on structures that leave a lasting imprint, and on traces that survive long enough to be recovered. Sleep, however, belongs to a different category of human activity. It is repetitive, essential, and deeply embedded in daily life, yet it produces almost no durable evidence. This creates a gap between what must have occurred and what can be directly studied. The absence is not accidental. It is built into the way sleep interacts with the environment. When a body lies down on soil, the contact is temporary. Pressure is applied and then released. The surface may shift slightly, but these changes are quickly altered by natural forces. Wind redistributes loose material, rain compacts or erodes the surface. Other animals move across the same ground, further blending any previous marks. Over time, these processes remove the subtle differences that might have indicated repeated use. Even in locations where people returned frequently, the ground does not preserve a clear record of their resting places unless specific conditions intervene. Such conditions, rapid burial, unusual preservation environments, or the presence of materials that resist decay are rare and unevenly distributed. This means that the archaeological record is shaped not only by past human behavior, but by the conditions that allowed certain traces to survive while others disappeared. The result is an incomplete picture, where some aspects of life are visible in detail, while others remain largely hidden. Sleep on the open ground falls into the latter category. It is not absent because it did not occur, but because it did not leave behind the kinds of evidence that archaeology can easily detect. This limitation requires a careful approach to interpretation. When researchers suggest that certain areas may have been used for resting, they do so by combining multiple lines of evidence, spatial organization, environmental context, and comparisons with observed human behavior in other settings. Each of these elements contributes to a broader understanding, but none can confirm sleep directly. The conclusions remain provisional, open to revision as new evidence or methods emerge. This cautious approach is essential, especially when dealing with aspects of life that are not directly preserved. It prevents the formation of conclusions that extend beyond what the evidence can support. In this way, the study of ancient sleep becomes an exercise in restraint as much as in discovery. The limits of knowledge are acknowledged alongside the insights that can be gained. Looking back toward the origins of human life, this limitation reflects a broader truth. Much of what defined early human existence, movement, interaction, rest, was carried out in ways that did not leave lasting marks. The open ground, as a shared surface, absorbed these activities without recording them in a durable form. What remains are traces of more resistant behaviors, tool use, fire, constructed features, while the quieter, more continuous aspects of life remain less visible. This imbalance does not mean that sleep was secondary. It means that it must be approached through indirect understanding, drawing on what is known about the human body, the environment, and the patterns of life that can be observed in both past and present contexts. The absence of direct evidence also invites a different kind of attention. Instead of focusing only on what is preserved, it encourages consideration of what must have been present but is no longer visible. Sleep, as a daily necessity, would have occurred wherever people lived, including the open ground. Its form may have varied with environment, climate, and social structure, but its presence would have been constant. The challenge lies in recognizing that constancy without expecting it to appear clearly in the material record. In this sense, the study of sleep becomes part of a broader effort to understand human life not only through what remains, but through what has been quietly lost. The open ground, which once held the weight of resting bodies night after night, returns to its original state, carrying no lasting sign of that contact. Yet the patterns of biology and environment suggest that this contact was continuous, shaping human experience in ways that can be approached, even if they cannot be fully seen. Sleeping on the open ground was rarely an individual act. Human life from its earliest stages unfolded within groups, and this collective structure extended into the night. The body did not lie down in isolation by default, but within a shared space where others were present, resting in close proximity. This arrangement was not simply a matter of social preference. It reflected a condition in which survival and rest were intertwined with the presence of others. The open ground did not provide clear boundaries between individuals. Instead, it offered a continuous surface on which bodies positioned themselves in relation to one another, forming patterns that were likely shaped by both practical and biological considerations. One of the most immediate effects of sleeping in a group is the sharing of warmth. Human bodies generate heat, and when placed near one another, this heat can accumulate within a limited area. In cooler conditions, proximity reduces the rate at which heat is lost to the surrounding air. This effect does not create a controlled environment, but it can moderate exposure, especially when combined with positions that conserve warmth. The arrangement of bodies, how close they were, how they oriented themselves would have influenced how effectively this shared warmth was maintained. These arrangements may have shifted throughout the night, as individuals adjusted their positions in response to changes in temperature or comfort. The ground beneath remained the same, but the distribution of heat above it could vary depending on how the group settled. The presence of others also alters how the environment is perceived during rest. Sounds that might be interpreted differently when alone become part of a shared field of experience. Movement within the group, small shifts, changes in breathing, the repositioning of limbs creates a layer of familiar activity that can blend with the sounds of the surrounding environment. This familiarity may influence how the body filters external stimuli. A known pattern of movement nearby may be less likely to prompt a response than an unfamiliar or irregular sound beyond the group. In this way, the presence of others does not remove exposure to the environment, but it changes how that exposure is processed. The body remains connected to its surroundings, but within a context that includes other human bodies as part of the immediate environment. Across the span of human development, group structure likely included individuals of different ages and physical conditions. Children, adults, and older individuals would have shared the same general space, though not necessarily in identical positions. The needs of each group member could influence where they were placed. Those more vulnerable to cold or environmental stress may have been positioned closer to the center, where shared warmth was greatest. Others may have occupied positions at the edges, where exposure was higher but where awareness of the surrounding environment could be maintained more directly. These patterns are not recorded in detail, but they are consistent with observations of how many social species organize themselves during rest. Such arrangements balance protection, comfort, and responsiveness without requiring explicit coordination. The open ground as a sleeping surface did not impose fixed positions. It allowed for variation, but within constraints set by the environment and the needs of the group. The absence of constructed boundaries meant that these arrangements could change from night to night, adapting to terrain, weather, and group size. A slightly elevated area, a patch of drier ground, or a location near a source of warmth could influence how the group formed its resting pattern. These choices, while limited by available conditions, suggest that sleep was organized in relation to both the environment and the social structure of the group. Looking back to the origins of human life, this collective aspect of sleep reflects a broader pattern. Humans evolved as social beings, and many of their behaviors, including rest, are shaped by this social context. The body does not only respond to the physical environment, it also responds to the presence of others, adjusting its behavior in ways that support both individual and group stability. In the case of sleeping on the open ground, this meant that rest was not a solitary withdrawal from the world, but a shared state, where multiple bodies lay within the same space, influencing and responding to one another. The ground in this setting held not a single sleeper, but a group, each individual part of a larger arrangement that made sleep possible under conditions of exposure. In this way, the experience of resting on the open ground was shaped not only by the earth beneath and the environment around, but also by the quiet presence of others nearby, forming a network of proximity that supported rest without removing uncertainty. Within a shared sleeping space on the open ground, differences between individuals would have shaped how that space was organized. A group is not uniform. It includes bodies at different stages of life, each with its own physical characteristics and needs. Children, whose bodies lose heat more quickly due to their size, may have required closer proximity to others, where shared warmth was more stable. Their position within the group could reduce exposure to cooler air and shifting conditions at the edges. Older individuals, whose bodies may respond differently to temperature changes or pressure, might also have benefited from positions that offered greater stability or less direct contact with uneven ground. These variations do not suggest a fixed system, but they indicate that the arrangement of bodies during sleep likely reflected more than simple availability of space. It responded to differences that were present within the group itself. The placement of individuals could influence how heat was distributed across the group. Bodies closer together create a more consistent zone of warmth, while those farther apart experience greater exposure. This distribution is not static. As individuals shift during the night, the pattern of warmth changes, requiring ongoing adjustment. A child moving closer to an adult, or an adult turning to reduce contact with cooler ground, alters the immediate environment for those nearby. These small movements, repeated across the night, create a dynamic arrangement where the group continually reshapes itself without conscious coordination. The ground remains the same, but the configuration above it evolves in response to internal and external conditions. The presence of different generations within the same sleeping space also introduces variation in movement patterns. Children may shift more frequently, responding to discomfort or changes in temperature with less consistency. Adults may exhibit more stable patterns, though still subject to adjustment. Older individuals may move more slowly or less often, depending on physical condition. These differences contribute to a layered pattern of motion within the group, where no single rhythm dominates. The sounds and movements produced by one individual become part of the environment for others, influencing how sleep is maintained. Familiar patterns of movement may be integrated into the background, while unexpected changes could prompt brief adjustments in posture or depth of sleep. This interaction does not require awareness. It operates through the body's ability to detect and respond to changes in its immediate surroundings. Across the broader context of human life, these generational differences reflect the continuity of the group over time. Sleep is not only a moment of rest, but part of a cycle that includes growth, aging, and the transfer of experience between individuals. While these aspects are not directly visible during the act of sleeping, they are present in how the group is formed and maintained. The arrangement of bodies on the ground may have supported not only physical needs such as warmth and stability, but also the ongoing structure of the group itself. Those who required more protection could be positioned where conditions were more moderate, while others occupied positions that balanced exposure and awareness of the environment. The open ground, without fixed divisions, allowed for these arrangements to form naturally. It did not enforce separation by age or role, but it provided a space where such differences could be accommodated through proximity and positioning. This flexibility would have been important in environments that change from night to night, where the conditions of one evening could differ from the next. The group, in response, would have adjusted its configuration, maintaining a pattern that supported rest while adapting to new circumstances. Observations of human groups in less modified environments today show that sleeping arrangements often reflect both practical and social factors, including age and physical condition. While these observations cannot be directly applied to early human life, they suggest that such considerations are part of how humans organize space during rest. The body, in this context, is not only responding to the ground and the environment, but also to the presence and condition of others. Sleeping on the open ground, therefore, becomes a shared process, shaped by multiple layers of influence. The differences between individuals do not disappear at night. They continue to play a role in how the group settles, how it moves, and how it maintains a balance between rest and exposure. In this way, the structure of the group is present even in stillness, guiding the arrangement of bodies across the ground and contributing to the conditions under which sleep occurs. The distance between bodies on the open ground was not random. It formed a pattern shaped by competing needs, warmth, space, and awareness of the surrounding environment. If individuals lay too close, movement could disturb others, pressure points might overlap, and the ability to adjust position would be limited. If they lay too far apart, the benefits of shared warmth would diminish, and the sense of connection within the group would weaken. The arrangement, therefore, likely existed within a narrow range, where proximity was close enough to offer some protection and thermal advantage, yet open enough to allow each body to respond independently to the uneven ground beneath. This balance did not need to be planned in advance. It could emerge through repeated adjustments, as each individual settled into a position that felt sustainable within the conditions of the night. The edges of the group carried a different set of conditions from the center. Those positioned toward the outer boundary would have experienced greater exposure to wind, temperature changes, and sounds from beyond the group. At the same time, they may have had a clearer orientation toward the surrounding environment, with fewer bodies blocking the direction of sound or movement. This does not suggest a fixed assignment of roles, but it indicates that position within the group could influence how the environment was perceived. Individuals at the center, more enclosed by others, may have experienced a more stable microenvironment, where temperature fluctuations were slightly moderated and external disturbances were filtered through layers of nearby bodies. The difference between center and edge would not have been absolute, but it would have been present enough to shape the experience of rest. Movement within the group introduced further variation. As individuals adjusted their posture during the night, the spacing between them changed. A slight shift inward could reduce exposure for one person, while increasing pressure or reducing space for another. A movement outward could create a small gap, allowing cooler air to circulate more freely. These changes did not occur in isolation. They formed a sequence of interactions, where one adjustment influenced the conditions for others, prompting further adjustments in response. Over time, this created a dynamic pattern of spacing that was continuously revised without the need for coordination or communication. The group, in this sense, behaved as a system, where each part responded to local conditions, and the overall arrangement emerged from these responses. The ground beneath this system remained constant in its irregularity. It did not adapt to the bodies above it. Instead, the bodies adapted to both the ground and to one another. The distance between individuals influenced how pressure was distributed, how heat was retained, and how movement could occur. These factors, in turn, affected how sleep was maintained across the group. Too much disturbance could lead to more frequent adjustments, while too little space could limit the body's ability to respond to discomfort. The balance between these extremes would have been maintained through small, continuous changes, guided by the body's internal signals rather than by deliberate planning. Looking back to the broader context of human origins, this pattern of spacing reflects a fundamental aspect of social living. Humans, like many other social species, organize themselves in relation to one another in ways that support both individual and group needs. During waking hours, this organization may be visible in movement, communication, and shared tasks. During sleep, it becomes quieter, expressed through positioning and proximity. The open ground, without defined boundaries, allowed this organization to take form directly, shaped by immediate conditions rather than by constructed space. Observations of other mammals show similar patterns, where individuals within a group maintain distances that balance warmth, comfort, and responsiveness to the environment. While human behavior is more complex, these shared tendencies suggest a common biological basis for how groups arrange themselves during rest. The absence of walls or fixed structures did not prevent organization. It allowed it to emerge in a flexible way, adapting to changes in terrain, weather, and group composition. In this way, sleeping on the open ground involved more than a collection of individuals lying down. It involved a shifting arrangement of bodies, each adjusting its position in relation to others, forming a pattern that supported rest while remaining open to the surrounding environment. The space between individuals was not empty. It was part of the system, shaping how the group experienced the night and how sleep was sustained within it. Sleep on the open ground did not fully separate the body from the need to respond. Even as the eyes closed and the body settled, a part of the nervous system remained active in a different way. maintaining a level of sensitivity to the surrounding environment. This state can be understood not as full wakefulness, but as a condition where rest and responsiveness overlap. The body reduces its engagement with the world, but it does not withdraw completely. It continues to receive signals, sound, movement, changes in temperature, and to process them at a reduced level. This capacity allows sleep to occur without removing the possibility of reaction, a balance that becomes especially relevant in environments where conditions can change without warning. The human brain moves through stages of sleep that vary in depth and in the degree to which external stimuli are processed. In lighter stages, sensory input is more likely to influence the sleeper. Sounds may be registered, shifts in pressure may prompt movement, and changes in the environment may lead to brief transitions toward wakefulness. In deeper stages, the brain becomes less responsive to external input, focusing instead on internal processes associated with restoration. On the open ground, where exposure to the environment is continuous, these stages may not have been isolated in long, uninterrupted blocks. Instead, the body may have moved between them more fluidly, allowing periods of deeper rest to be interspersed with moments of increased sensitivity. This pattern does not indicate a deficiency in sleep. It reflects an adjustment to conditions where complete disengagement could carry risks. The concept of a half-awake state is often used to describe this kind of balance, though it does not imply that the body is consciously alert. Rather, it suggests that certain systems remain more responsive than they would be in a fully controlled environment. For example, a sudden sound may trigger a brief increase in heart rate or a change in breathing, even if the individual does not become fully aware of it. A shift in temperature might lead to a slight movement, adjusting posture without interrupting sleep entirely. These responses are mediated by the nervous system, which continues to monitor the environment at a background level. This monitoring does not require active attention. It operates through automatic processes that detect changes and determine whether they are significant enough to prompt a stronger reaction. In the context of early human life, this capacity for partial responsiveness would have been part of the broader set of adaptations that allowed sleep to occur in open environments. The body did not rely on barriers or enclosures to create safety. Instead, it maintained a degree of connection to the surroundings, allowing for the possibility of response if conditions changed. This does not mean that sleep was constantly interrupted or that the body remained in a state of tension. It means that the boundary between sleep and wakefulness was more flexible, allowing the body to move between states as needed. Observations of sleep in other mammals provide a useful comparison. Many species exhibit patterns where one part of the brain remains more active while the rest of the body rests, or where sleep depth varies in response to environmental conditions. Human sleep is more uniform in its structure, but it still retains the ability to adjust responsiveness based on context. The open ground, without insulation from sound, temperature, or movement, would have encouraged this flexibility. The body, in response, would have balanced its need for restoration with its need to remain connected to the environment. This balance is not static. It changes throughout the night, influenced by both internal cycles and external conditions. A period of relative quiet may allow for deeper rest, while a change in the environment may prompt a shift toward lighter sleep. These transitions occur without deliberate control, guided by the nervous system's ongoing assessment of the surroundings. The result is a form of sleep that is not entirely separate from the world, but integrated within it. The body rests, but it does so while maintaining the capacity to respond, preserving a link to the environment that continues even in the absence of full awareness. Within the flow of sleep on the open ground, moments of slight awakening may have occurred without fully interrupting rest. These moments do not resemble the clear transition from sleep to wakefulness that is familiar in controlled environments. Instead, they are brief shifts in awareness, often incomplete and quickly resolved. The body may open its eyes for a short time, adjust its position, or alter its breathing before returning to a deeper state. These transitions are not necessarily remembered. They pass quietly, leaving no clear trace in memory, yet they form part of how sleep is maintained under conditions of exposure. The nervous system, which continues to process sensory input at a reduced level, plays a central role in these responses. When a change in the environment is detected, such as a sudden sound, a shift in temperature, or movement within the group, the system evaluates it without requiring conscious interpretation. If the change is small or consistent with existing patterns, the body may remain in a lighter phase of sleep, making only minimal adjustments. If the change is more pronounced or unexpected, it may prompt a brief elevation in awareness. This does not always lead to full waking. Often, it results in a short period of increased sensitivity, during which the body gathers information before returning to rest. These responses can be understood as part of a broader set of survival-related processes that operate even during sleep. The body does not need to identify specific causes in order to react. It responds to variations, differences in sound, rhythm, or intensity rather than to clearly defined events. This allows for a general form of readiness, where the body can adjust to a wide range of conditions without requiring detailed analysis. On the open ground, where the environment is not controlled, such flexibility would have been important. The night does not present a single, stable set of conditions. It changes gradually and sometimes unexpectedly, requiring the body to remain capable of responding at any point during rest. The pattern of these slight awakenings may have varied across individuals and environments. In quieter conditions, where changes were minimal, the body may have remained in deeper states for longer periods. In more variable settings, with greater exposure to sound or movement, these transitions may have occurred more frequently. This variability does not indicate a lack of rest. It reflects the body's capacity to adapt its sleep structure to the conditions it encounters. Modern research on sleep shows that brief awakenings can occur without disrupting overall sleep quality, especially when they are short and followed by a return to deeper stages. While such findings are based on contemporary settings, they suggest that the human body is capable of integrating these moments into the broader pattern of rest. The presence of others nearby may also have influenced how these slight awakenings were experienced. Movements within the group, changes in breathing patterns, or shifts in position could create familiar disturbances that the body learns to recognize as non-threatening. Over time, these patterns may become part of the background, less likely to prompt a full response. In contrast, unfamiliar or irregular changes, such as a sudden sound from outside the group, may stand out more clearly, increasing the likelihood of a brief rise in awareness. This distinction does not require conscious recognition. It operates through the nervous system's ability to detect patterns and respond to deviations from them. Across the longer span of human development, these processes reflect an environment where sleep was not isolated from potential change. The body did not rely on complete stillness or silence. It rested within a field of ongoing variation, maintaining the ability to respond through small, often unnoticed adjustments. These slight awakenings, though rarely remembered, may have been part of how sleep remained compatible with exposure. They allowed the body to remain connected to its surroundings, without fully leaving the state of rest. In this way, sleep on the open ground was not a continuous descent into inactivity, but a dynamic process, where moments of reduced awareness and brief returns toward sensitivity formed a pattern that supported both rest and responsiveness throughout the night. Across the full duration of the night, the body did not move toward a single goal of uninterrupted depth. Instead, it maintained a balance that allowed rest to occur alongside a continued connection to the environment. This balance was not fixed. It shifted in response to conditions that changed over time. Temperature gradually dropping, wind altering direction, sounds emerging and fading, and the subtle movements within the group itself. Each of these influences could adjust the body's position within the spectrum of sleep, guiding it toward deeper or lighter states without a clear boundary between them. The result was a form of rest that did not depend on complete stillness or isolation, but on the ability to move between levels of awareness as needed. The deeper phases of sleep, associated with physical recovery, remained essential. The body requires these phases to maintain its internal systems, to restore energy, and to support ongoing function. On the open ground, these phases may still have occurred, but they were likely shaped by the surrounding environment. Rather than extending for long, uninterrupted periods, they may have appeared in shorter intervals, returning more frequently after brief shifts toward lighter sleep. This pattern does not reduce the value of deeper rest. It distributes it across the night, allowing the body to accumulate the necessary time in these states while still remaining capable of responding to changes. The continuity of sleep, in this sense, is not defined by the absence of interruption, but by the ability to return to rest after each adjustment. At the same time, lighter phases of sleep provided a form of openness to the environment. In these states, the body remains more responsive to external input. Sounds are more likely to be registered, pressure changes more readily felt, and movement more easily initiated. These phases allow the body to maintain a connection to the surrounding world, even as overall awareness remains reduced. The alternation between deeper and lighter states creates a system where rest and responsiveness are not opposing conditions, but complementary ones. Each supports the other, forming a cycle that adapts to both internal needs and external conditions. This balance reflects a broader principle in the biology of sleep. The human body does not require complete disconnection from the environment to rest effectively. It requires a structure that allows for restoration while preserving the capacity to respond when necessary. On the open ground, where exposure is continuous, this structure would have been particularly important. The body could not rely on barriers to reduce uncertainty. Instead, it relied on its own internal processes to manage the relationship between rest and awareness. These processes operate without conscious control, guided by the nervous system's ongoing integration of sensory input and internal signals. The presence of others within the group may have contributed to this balance as well. Shared patterns of movement and sound could create a more predictable environment, allowing the body to remain in deeper states for longer periods when conditions were stable. At the same time, the group did not eliminate exposure. It modified it, creating a layered environment where some influences were reduced and others remained. The body within this setting continued to adjust, maintaining a level of responsiveness appropriate to the conditions of the night. Looking back toward the earlier stages of human existence, this balance between deep rest and continuous awareness reflects a condition where sleep was integrated into the environment rather than separated from it. The ground beneath, the air above, and the presence of others all contributed to a system in which the body rested while remaining part of a larger, changing context. This system did not aim for complete stillness or absolute safety. It allowed for rest within uncertainty, supported by the body's ability to move between states as conditions required. In this way, sleeping on the open ground was not defined by a single mode of rest. It was defined by a shifting equilibrium, where the need for recovery and the need for responsiveness were held together, shaping how sleep unfolded across the night without resolving into a fixed or final form. Over time, the direct contact between the human body and the open ground may not have remained entirely unchanged. While early conditions placed the body in immediate contact with soil, stone, and natural surfaces, there are indications that small forms of separation began to appear. These changes were not sudden, and they did not transform the experience of sleep into something fully controlled. Instead, they introduced a gradual shift, where the body began to rest with minimal layers between itself and the ground. These layers could include dry grass, leaves, branches, or other materials gathered from the surrounding environment. Their use does not represent a complete departure from sleeping on the open ground. Rather, it reflects a subtle modification of that condition, where the surface remained natural, but its direct impact on the body was slightly altered. The presence of such materials would have affected how pressure and temperature were experienced. Even a thin layer of plant matter can change the distribution of weight, reducing the intensity of pressure at specific points. It can also introduce small pockets of air, which slow the transfer of heat between the body and the ground. These effects are limited, but they are noticeable. The body, in contact with a slightly softer and less conductive surface, may have experienced fewer abrupt pressure points and a slower loss of warmth. This does not eliminate discomfort or exposure. It adjusts them, creating a marginally more stable condition without removing the variability of the environment. The selection of materials may have been influenced by what was available in the immediate surroundings. Dry vegetation, if present, would have been more effective than damp material, which can increase heat loss and reduce insulation. The act of gathering and placing such materials does not require complex tools or long preparation. It can be done within the constraints of the environment, using what is already present. Observations of human groups in less modified environments show that such practices can occur without permanent structures, relying instead on repeated small-scale adjustments. While these observations cannot define early human behavior with certainty, they suggest that minimal modification of the ground is within the range of human activity under natural conditions. The introduction of a layer between body and ground also changes how the surface responds to movement. Loose material can shift under weight, creating a different kind of feedback than compacted soil or stone. This can reduce the sharpness of pressure but may introduce instability, requiring the body to adjust its position more frequently. The balance between softness and stability would have depended on the thickness and composition of the material, as well as on the terrain beneath it. The ground itself remained the foundation, shaping the overall experience of rest, even as these additions modified its immediate effect. Across the longer span of human development, these small changes reflect a broader pattern. Humans did not move directly from complete exposure to fully constructed environments. The transition occurred through incremental steps, each one introducing a new way of interacting with the ground. The use of natural materials as a surface for rest represents one of these steps. It does not remove the body from the environment. It alters the relationship between them, creating a degree of separation that remains partial and dependent on available conditions. This partial separation may have influenced how the body regulated temperature and responded to pressure during sleep. With a layer in place, the rate of heat loss could be moderated, and the distribution of weight slightly improved. These changes, though small, could accumulate over the course of a night, affecting the continuity and depth of rest. At the same time, the environment continued to play a central role. Wind, moisture, and temperature variations still reached the body, shaping the overall experience of sleep. The ground, even when covered by natural materials, remained an active participant in this process. In this way, the shift away from direct contact with the ground did not represent a clear boundary. It was a gradual adjustment where the body began to introduce elements that modified its immediate surroundings without fully controlling them. Sleep, in this context, remained connected to the open environment, but with a growing capacity to shape the conditions under which it occurred. This capacity did not eliminate exposure. It changed how that exposure was experienced, marking a subtle but meaningful development in the long relationship between the human body and the ground on which it rested. As small layers began to separate the body from the ground, another change may have followed, quieter but equally important. The place of rest itself started to become more defined, not in the sense of permanent structures or enclosed shelters, but as a repeated choice of location that gradually gained meaning through use. When a group returned to the same general area over time, certain parts of that space may have been used more consistently for resting. These places did not become rooms or constructed environments. They remained open, exposed to the same conditions as the surrounding landscape. Yet through repetition they began to form a kind of familiarity, where the ground was not entirely new each night, but partially known. This familiarity could influence how the body experienced rest. A surface that had been cleared of larger debris, even slightly, would present fewer unexpected pressure points. An area with more stable ground, less prone to moisture, or partially shielded by natural features such as rocks or vegetation, could offer a more consistent experience from one night to the next. These differences do not create full protection. They introduce degrees of variation, where some locations are marginally more suitable for rest than others. The act of choosing such places, even without altering them significantly, represents a step towards shaping the environment in relation to sleep. The body is no longer entirely subject to random placement. It begins to return to spaces that offer certain advantages, however limited. The repeated use of these locations could also affect the ground itself. Even without deliberate construction, the continued presence of bodies may slightly compress the surface, reduce loose material, or create a more even area over time. These changes are subtle and easily reversed by natural processes, but during periods of repeated use they could contribute to a more stable resting surface. The addition of plant material, if used, could further define these spaces, creating a thin layer that distinguishes them from the surrounding ground. Such features would not be permanent, and their traces would rarely survive, but they suggest a movement toward creating a more consistent relationship between body and surface. The idea of a place to sleep begins to emerge, not as a constructed environment, but as a location within the landscape that is recognized and reused. This development does not remove exposure to the elements. Wind, temperature, and sound continue to influence the body in the same ways. However, the predictability of the immediate surface may reduce some of the variability experienced during rest. The body, encountering a more familiar terrain, may require fewer adjustments to pressure and posture, allowing for a slightly more stable pattern of sleep. This stability remains relative. It does not eliminate the need for movement or adaptation. It modifies the conditions under which these adjustments occur. Across the broader context of human origins, this shift reflects an increasing interaction between behavior and environment. Rather than accepting any available surface, the body begins to engage in a process of selection, guided by previous experience. This selection does not require complex planning. It can arise from repeated exposure, where certain locations are found to be more suitable and are therefore chosen again. Over time, these choices can create a pattern, where the landscape is used in a more structured way, even in the absence of permanent modification. Observations of human groups in environments with limited constructed shelter show that resting places are often chosen with attention to factors such as drainage, elevation, and proximity to other group members. While these patterns vary and cannot be directly projected onto early human life, they suggest that the selection of sleeping locations is influenced by practical considerations that can be recognized without formal design. The open ground remains the primary surface, but the way it is used becomes more consistent. In this way, the shift from direct contact with the ground to the use of minimal layers and repeated locations represents a gradual change in how sleep is situated within the environment. The body is still exposed, still responsive to the conditions of the night, but it begins to rest within spaces that carry a degree of familiarity and partial stability. This does not create separation from the natural world. It introduces a subtle form of organization within it, where the act of sleeping becomes linked not only to the body and the ground, but also to the repeated use of particular places within the landscape. As repeated places of rest became more familiar and minimal layers began to separate the body from the ground, the experience of sleeping in the open did not end. It shifted gradually, carrying forward many of the same conditions while introducing small forms of control. The ground was still present, still uneven, still subject to moisture and temperature changes. The air continued to move, the night continued to vary, and the body remained exposed. Yet within this continuity, there were signs of a slow transition. The body was no longer placed entirely at random within the landscape. It began to rest in locations that offered slight advantages, on surfaces that had been modestly altered, and within arrangements that reflected prior experience. This did not create a new environment. It adjusted the existing one. The introduction of even minimal control changes how the body relates to its surroundings. A thin layer of plant material, a cleared patch of earth, or a repeatedly used space reduces some of the variability that would otherwise be encountered. Pressure points may become more predictable, temperature exchange slightly moderated, and the need for constant adjustment somewhat reduced. These changes are small, but they accumulate across the night. The body, encountering fewer abrupt variations, may maintain a steadier pattern of rest, even while remaining responsive to the environment. This steadiness does not eliminate the need for movement or awareness. It shifts the balance, allowing the body to spend longer periods in deeper states before responding to change. At the same time, the environment continues to assert its influence. The ground beneath, even when covered, still shapes how weight is distributed. The air above still carries temperature, moisture, and sound. The absence of full enclosure means that exposure remains a defining feature of sleep. The transition, therefore, is not from exposure to protection, but from complete exposure to partial modulation. The body begins to shape its immediate surroundings without removing itself from them. This distinction is important. It suggests that the early stages of change did not replace one condition with another. They layered new elements onto an existing relationship, gradually altering how that relationship was experienced. Over longer periods, these small adjustments may have opened the possibility for further developments. The repeated selection of certain locations, the use of natural materials, and the organization of group space all contribute to a growing familiarity with modifying the environment in relation to rest. These practices do not yet form structures or permanent shelters, but they establish patterns of behavior that can support such developments in the future. The body, through repeated interaction with the ground and its surroundings, begins to participate more actively in shaping the conditions under which it rests. This participation remains limited by available resources and environmental constraints, but it marks a shift from passive acceptance toward partial influence. Looking back toward the origins of human life, this gradual transition reflects a broader pattern of adaptation. Humans did not begin with the ability to create controlled sleeping environments. They developed this capacity over time through small, repeated actions that altered their relationship with the ground. The open environment remained the primary context, but within it, variations began to emerge: areas that were slightly more stable, surfaces that were slightly more forgiving, and arrangements that were slightly more predictable. These variations did not remove uncertainty. They reduced it in small ways, allowing the body to rest with a marginally greater degree of continuity. Observations of environments where modern human influence is limited show that such gradual modifications are both possible and common. People may use available materials, select specific locations, and return to them over time, creating a pattern of use that remains flexible but not entirely unstructured. While these observations cannot define early human behavior with certainty, they illustrate how minimal interventions can alter the experience of sleeping on the ground without transforming it into something entirely different. In this way, the movement away from direct, unmodified contact with the ground was not a single event. It was a slow and uneven process, where the body remained closely connected to the environment while beginning to shape it in limited ways. Sleep, throughout this process, continued to exist within exposure, but with a growing capacity to manage that exposure. The ground was still there, still influencing every aspect of rest, but the way it was encountered had begun to change, marking a subtle shift in the long relationship between the human body and the place where it lay down at night. When the body no longer needed to rest directly on the open ground, something quiet but significant began to change in the experience of sleep. The surface became more stable, the temperature more controlled, and the surrounding environment less variable. Over time, these changes reduced the number of adjustments the body had to make during the night. Pressure became more evenly distributed, heat loss more predictable, and external disturbances less immediate. Sleep in this context moved toward a condition that could be described as safer, though not entirely without variation. This shift did not occur all at once, and it did not eliminate the underlying biological processes shaped in earlier conditions. Instead, it introduced a new balance, where the body could rely more on the environment to support rest, rather than continuously adapting to it. The concept of safety in sleep is not defined by the complete absence of disturbance. It is defined by a reduction in unpredictability. When the ground is no longer uneven, when the air is less variable, and when the body is partially separated from the surrounding environment, the need for constant responsiveness decreases. The nervous system, which once maintained a higher level of background sensitivity, may shift toward deeper and more sustained phases of rest. This does not mean that responsiveness disappears. The body still retains the capacity to react to significant changes. However, the threshold for such reactions may increase, allowing more time to be spent in states associated with restoration. This change can influence how sleep is structured, not by altering its fundamental stages, but by modifying how often transitions between them occur. Across the broader timeline of human development, this movement towards safer sleep reflects an increasing ability to shape the environment. The use of materials, the creation of defined spaces, and eventually the construction of shelters all contribute to this process. Each step reduces exposure to certain elements, temperature fluctuations, wind, moisture, and external disturbances, while leaving others intact. The result is not a complete separation from the natural world, but a reconfiguration of how that world is experienced during rest. The body, once fully immersed in the environment, becomes partially insulated from it. This insulation allows for a more consistent experience of sleep, where the conditions remain relatively stable over the course of the night. At the same time, the biological systems that evolved under earlier conditions do not disappear. The capacity for partial responsiveness, the tendency to adjust position, and the sensitivity to environmental cues remain part of the human body. In more controlled environments, these systems may be less frequently engaged, but they continue to operate at a background level. This suggests that the experience of safe sleep is layered over a deeper structure that was shaped by long periods of exposure. The body carries within it a memory of conditions where rest required ongoing adjustment, even if those conditions are no longer present in the same form. Observations of sleep in modern settings show that, When environmental disturbances are reduced, sleep tends to become more consolidated. Periods of deeper rest may extend, and the number of brief awakenings may decrease. These patterns indicate that the body responds to increased stability by allowing more continuous rest. However, this response is not absolute. Variations in environment, individual physiology, and social context continue to influence how sleep is experienced. The idea of completely uninterrupted sleep remains an ideal rather than a universal condition. In this way, the shift away from sleeping on the open ground does not create a final or fixed state. It introduces a new range of possibilities where the body can experience rest with less direct influence from the environment, while still retaining the capacity to respond when necessary. The meaning of sleep begins to change, not only as a biological process, but as an experience shaped by increasing control over surroundings. Yet this change remains connected to its origins. The body that now rests on a more stable surface is the same body that once lay directly on the earth, adjusting continuously to the conditions of the night. The difference lies not in the structure of the body itself, but in the environment it now inhabits, and in the reduced need to negotiate with the ground beneath it. As sleep became more protected and less exposed to the open environment, the changes were not only physical, they also touched the way the body related to the world during rest. When the ground was no longer directly felt, when the air no longer moved freely across the skin, and when sound became more contained, the connection between the sleeping body and its surroundings began to soften. This shift did not remove the environment entirely, but it reduced its immediacy. The body, once required to remain partially responsive to a wide range of external signals, may have begun to rely less on that continuous background awareness. Over time, this could alter how certain sensory systems were engaged during sleep. The ability to detect small changes in sound, temperature, or movement did not disappear, but it may have been used less frequently in conditions where those changes were minimized. In earlier conditions, lying on the open ground meant that the body was always in contact with a dynamic environment. Subtle variations, wind passing across the skin, a slight cooling of the ground, distant movement carried through sound formed part of the structure of sleep. The nervous system processed these variations without requiring conscious attention, maintaining a link between rest and the surrounding world. As the environment became more controlled, many of these variations were reduced. The body no longer needed to interpret as many signals, and the range of sensory input narrowed. This does not suggest a loss in a strict biological sense, but it indicates a shift in how the body's capacities were used. Systems that once operated continuously during sleep may have become less central to maintaining rest. Another change may have occurred in the relationship between sleep and uncertainty. On the open ground, uncertainty was a constant presence. The body could not fully predict what would occur during the night, and this unpredictability shaped how sleep was structured. The balance between deeper rest and partial responsiveness allowed the body to remain adaptable, adjusting to changes without fully waking. In more stable environments, where conditions are more predictable, this balance may shift. The body can move toward longer periods of uninterrupted rest, relying on the reduced likelihood of sudden change. This does not eliminate uncertainty entirely, but it alters its role within the experience of sleep. The body, in a more controlled setting, may spend less time preparing for variation and more time in sustained restorative states. Across the broader span of human history, this transition reflects a gradual reorientation. Sleep, once integrated into the open environment, becomes increasingly situated within spaces that separate the body from direct exposure. This separation changes not only the physical conditions of rest, but also the sensory landscape in which it occurs. The ground, the air, and the surrounding sounds become more distant, filtered through layers of material or structure. The body, in response, experiences a different form of stillness, one that is less influenced by external variation and more defined by internal rhythms. Observations of sleep in modern environments show that reduced sensory input can lead to more consolidated sleep patterns, with fewer interruptions and longer periods of deeper rest. At the same time, some individuals remain sensitive to even small disturbances, suggesting that the underlying capacity for responsiveness persists. This persistence points back to earlier conditions, where such responsiveness was continuously engaged. The body carries forward these capabilities, even when they are not required to the same extent. The shift away from sleeping on the open ground does not erase earlier patterns. It layers new conditions over them, creating a different balance between rest and awareness. In this way, the movement towards safer, more controlled sleep environments may have introduced both gains and changes that are more difficult to define. Greater stability allows for more consistent rest, but it also reduces the range of environmental signals that once shaped the experience of sleep. The body, no longer required to adjust to constant variation, may settle into a different pattern, one that is quieter in its interaction with the surrounding world. This change is not easily measured, and it does not produce clear markers in the archaeological record. It exists as a shift in experience, where the relationship between the body and its environment during sleep becomes less immediate, less varied, and more contained within the boundaries of a controlled space. When the body rests in a space that is stable, insulated, and predictable, sleep can unfold with fewer interruptions and less need for adjustment. This condition, familiar in much of the present, allows the body to move more steadily through its internal cycles. Yet the question remains whether this steadiness reflects a complete form of rest, or simply one form among many that the human body is capable of sustaining. Looking back across the long relationship between the body and the open ground, sleep does not appear as a fixed state with a single ideal structure. It appears as something shaped by conditions, adapting to the environment in which it occurs. The body that once lay directly on the earth, responding to sound, temperature, and movement, did not experience sleep in isolation. It experienced it as part of a continuous exchange with the surrounding world. In that earlier condition, rest and uncertainty were not separate. They existed together, forming a pattern in which the body could recover while remaining connected to its environment. This connection did not prevent sleep. It defined how sleep was structured, how it shifted, and how it was sustained across the night. As environments became more controlled, this connection did not disappear, but it became less immediate. The body, no longer required to respond to constant variation, could remain in deeper states for longer periods. This change suggests a movement toward efficiency, where rest becomes more consolidated and less interrupted. At the same time, it raises a question about the range of experiences that sleep can take. If the body is capable of resting under both exposed and controlled conditions, then sleep itself may not have a single natural form. It may exist along a spectrum, shaped by the balance between stability and variation. Across different environments, this balance shifts, altering how the body moves between states of rest and responsiveness. The idea of normal sleep becomes less certain when viewed in this broader context. What is often considered typical today, long, uninterrupted periods of rest in a controlled environment, may represent one point within a wider range of possibilities. Earlier conditions suggest that sleep can also occur in a more fragmented or variable pattern without losing its restorative function. Modern observations support this variability. In different settings, people exhibit a range of sleep patterns, influenced by light, temperature, social structure, and daily activity. These patterns do not always align with a single model, yet they can still support the body's needs. This suggests that sleep is not defined solely by continuity or depth, but by the body's ability to achieve restoration within the conditions it encounters. The open ground, as one of the earliest contexts for human rest, represents a condition where sleep was integrated into a dynamic environment. The body lay between the ground and the sky, receiving input from both, adjusting continuously without full awareness. This form of sleep did not aim for complete stillness. It allowed for movement, for shifts in awareness, and for responsiveness to the surrounding world. In contrast, more controlled environments reduce these interactions, creating a space where the body can rest with fewer external influences. Both conditions support sleep, but they do so in different ways, emphasizing different aspects of the body's capacity to rest. The transition from one to the other does not mark a simple improvement or loss. It reflects a change in how the relationship between body and environment is structured. The body remains the same in its fundamental processes, but the context in which those processes unfold has been altered. This alteration raises a final open question. If sleep has always been shaped by the conditions in which it occurs, then what does it mean to sleep naturally? Is it the form that emerges in a stable, controlled environment, where the body can remain undisturbed for long periods? Or is it the form that existed when the body lay on the open ground, adjusting continuously to a world that never became still? The answer does not settle into a single conclusion. It remains suspended between these possibilities, reflecting the complexity of a process that has accompanied the human body from its earliest origins to the present, changing in form, yet remaining essential in every condition through which it has passed.